Zoom and all this stuff. It still sort of blows me away.
Well, one of the saddest part is we told people, like, facilities who wanted to be able to access it. Told them, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, you can't do that. And now here we are, and it's just everywhere. Yeah.
It was way easier than we thought.
Okay.
All right. So, can the gentleman on our screen, Todd, Jim.
Yes. Hello?
Christine?
Yes.
Can everybody hear? David?
David
Yes.
is here.
Yep.
Okay, if everyone can hear us, we're going to go ahead and start our budget meeting for tonight. Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. And we're going to start with introductions. And so we're going to start at the far right end of the table here and come around.
Sarah Fay, Monroe School District, Zone 2.
Roger Urban, Board Member, Zone 2.
Miriam Cummins, she, her, Aya, LBL, Zone 6. Sarah Finger McDonald, Zone 4, formerly Corral School District, board member now, representative for district. Amy Vetter, she, her, LBL, board member, Zone 5.
Michael Thompson, LBL, Board Member, Zone 3.
Judy Wooten, Board Member, Zone 1, LBL.
Jason Hayes, Superintendent.
Nicole Island, Zone 5 for Lebanon.
I'm Mattingly, Zone 6.
Tina Woodley, Executive Director.
Rockwell Ware, Executive Financial Officer.
Lisa Shane, Executive Assistant.
I will have my recognition.
And in our audience, we have,
Phil Hayes, newly elected for Zone 1.
okay, and then on our screen, we'll start with Jim. We got two Jims, so everybody.
I'll go first.
Thank you.
Jim Blount, he, him, Board Director, LBL ESD, Zone 4.
Jim Gorley, Budget Committee Member. Sweet Home.
I'm going to go to Christine.
Yeah, Racine Follett, Alsea School Board, Zone 1.
I think we have David and Todd left.
Yeah,
David?
I am here. David Dunstan, Zone 7, LBL Board.
And Todd Noble from Corvallis. I'm the health director for Lynn County.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Having done that, now we would join me in the pledge to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would just make a little kind of a comment to the beginning. With our folks online, there's a little bit of a delay. So when you ask whoever then takes over as chair and you're asking for a motion, there'll be a delay, and it sounds like they're saying no. So you just have to, usually it's a yay, but the delay makes it sound that it's not. Okay. Thank you. And so, Mr. Hay, it's up to you. Legal responsibilities of the Budget Committee.
Yeah, so we are charged here tonight with reviewing a budget draft for the 25-26 academic year, and we are covered by having budget committee members for our zones that match the zones of our board members. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and for those of you that were able to join us online. And so what we're going to go through tonight here is presenting our budget to you. We have our Executive Financial Officer, Rockwell Luer, that's going to walk us through the details of that in just a moment. But I think we're at the point now where we can look at an election of our officers, our presiding officers, and once we pass the baton or the gavel, so to speak, then we can get started in the meat and potatoes of this.
So we need a nominations for presiding officer.
I'll do it again. I'll nominate. And I'll nominate Ryan. Oh, sorry, Ryan. Okay, I gave her an option, she said no, so you're the lucky winner.
Okay,
So good to have you here.
so that was a nomination for Ryan, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll second.
second. Okay. So are there any other nominations from the floor, or would you like to, just kind of, so you can move to close nominations? Kind of like, you know, you kind of railroad. Sorry, sir.
That's all right, it's one meeting, right? I don't have to meet with the superintendent.
Yeah, I know, that'd be awful.
Are there any other nominations from the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor of Brian being the board, or the budget chair, all in favor say aye.
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 So moved. Steve, there's the delay. Okay, all right, and so with that, sir, it is now your meeting.
Okay, well, it looks like we need to get a vice presiding officer, so do we have any nominations for vice presiding officer?
I open nominations to nominate Sarah Bigelow to be our vice presiding officer.
Okay, we have a nomination for Sarah. Do we have any other nominations? All right, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of Sarah as the vice presiding officer?
Aye.
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 So, I don't know what the vice does. I guess if I have to leave.
If you pass out.
That reminds me. Everybody had to go.
Oh, I did have something.
Yeah, I just got a call out now. Okay, moving on. So, looks like we need to approve the budget committee meetings for last year. I have a question about this one. Okay, boy, I wasn't out last year, so do I just abstain from that?
Yes.
Okay, so do I need a motion to approve the May 15th, 2024 budget committee meeting?
I'll motion to approve the May 15th, 2024 budget committee minutes.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Let's go on to the budget presentation. Let's start with the budget development process.
Okay, so Rocco is going to share his screen so that we have up on the screen here, everyone in the room can see it, as well as our folks online can see the presentation that Rocco and I are going to work from here tonight. So again, thank you so much for being here. Greatly appreciate your time and attention to this important matter of reviewing our proposed budget for the academic year of 25-26. And so what you're going to get from me here is the introduction, and I will conclude with, after going through some process pieces here, with the budget message, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rocco to walk through some of the details of the budget, and feel free to ask questions along the way if you have those, and we'll work our way right through this. To start with, just want to center us around our mission. So LBL's mission is, through services and collaboration with community schools and families, we empower every child with the skills and resources needed for success, fostering innovation and responsiveness in education. We do a lot at this agency to create access for kids. And I think that's a really important aspect when you think about the budget, and what it does is we create access, we look through our equity lens to make sure that our kids have opportunities, and for a variety of different reasons why they might need help with access for that when it comes to children, but we also do a lot of other things to support school districts. So I'm going to just keep going through here. One of the things that I'm really proud of, so you can go to the next slide, Rocco. There we go. Is that our board a year ago, when we were doing our strategic planning, identified our values. and this is something that I'm really proud of. I think that we absolutely are about children and families first. I think that we need to center on that always. We're about equity, inclusivity, and honoring differences, and making sure that we hone in on making sure all people within our organization are supported. When you think about competency and expertise, we hire a lot of experts in their field. We are basically an entire agency of specialists, from people who are ECSE, so early childhood special education specialists, to occupational therapists and physical therapists, speech language pathologists, to technology specialists, like network technicians and cybersecurity experts. So a lot of different specialists, so that expertise is important to us and to our constituents in being able to provide service. The next one is one that I think that is always something that I would like to highlight is we care about kindness. We're caring. Humility is an important part of how we approach things. It's certainly part of my leadership. I believe that we can hold people accountable. We can push hard. We can look for excellence while also being kind, caring human beings. By doing that, we build trust and connection, which builds teamwork and collaborative leadership. And then finally, if you look at health and balance, we want to make sure that we keep the main thing, and that's kids and families, and that includes our staff and having health and balance within our organization. And then finally, with sustainability. So those are our values. I also want to center you around our equity lens. I printed a copy, so those of you that are in the room, you'll see when the budget that you received also has just the front page of the text of the equity lens. It is on page, make sure I'm just orienting to this. Page 6, I believe. Yes, page 6. And so you can see that we celebrate and honor differences and believe that every student, staff, and community partner should be treated equitably. Our focus is to eliminate disparities among groups, and very often how we do this is we ask these questions of who does our decision impact? Who has opportunities? Who's included? Who is not? Whose voices are at the table? Whose voices should be at the table? And then what can we do about it? So that's something I want you to center around that and think about that as we go through and review our budget. We'll go to the next slide. The other centering point here, and this is something I did not make copies for everyone. I know that many of you have seen this, and I can provide copies if you want a copy later. But our local service plan is our document that we go through a governance process with our superintendents and all of the boards for each of our component districts to determine what services that we provide in the 4 core service areas of special education, technology support, school improvement, and administration and support. And so we work through process. We actually, every few years, and certainly every other year that going into a new biennium, we do a larger review of the local service plan. This year we spent, I'm looking at my team, about 4 or 5 months really, diving into all the details of the local service plan. So that's something else that drives our work, and everything we do is in that local service plan. Other services that we have, we do have some non-local service plan grants that are in here. So Medicaid administrative claims, this is something that has been growing in our region. We actually have had to come to the board on a couple of different occasions to change our budgeting amount. The budget authority, because we have a really successful Medicaid administrative claims person that started with us about 6 months ago, and the millions of many more millions of dollars that are being brought into our school districts because of that is really fantastic, and I think that will continue to grow. The Grow Your Own program is a grant that helps students, I should back up. It's about staff members that are currently staff members in our system that are working to become teachers of some sort, whether it's teachers or counselors, speech language pathologists, that sort of thing. So we have a grant with that. And then you can see with debt service, capital projects, those other things that are articulated in here. We have a variety of purchase services. And then just as, you know, because we have to have at least one oddball thing other than me as the superintendent, is that we are the fiscal agent for OAESD. And so that's just an extra thing that OAESD is the Oregon Association of ESDs. And so we just provide the fiscal support for that organization. In terms of the process, we start with the budget committee being selected. So that's all of you. So thank you for being here. We go through that in the fall. We work on management develops budget recommendations through a lot of meetings throughout the winter and spring. Rocco has monthly or many times twice monthly meetings with our directors, our coordinators that pull together the details to be able to create the budget that comes to the budget committee. And so we look at in late spring, that's where we're at right now, the budget committee looking at the final budget proposal. In May and June, we have public notices that we've done, the budget is out there so that the public can be able to provide feedback in a public hearing. And then by June 30th, we need to have a formally adopted budget. And with appropriations being made, these are things that if the budget committee tonight is in favor of moving forward with this, you'll see that we can actually have motions for appropriations tonight and a tax levy that's declared, and so that process can actually be tonight. And then finally, we get into the budget message, and this is where, you know, in a more formal way, I'm actually going to go through and read the budget message for the public and for all of you. So if you want to follow along with this, it's actually on page 1 of your budget document. So I'm pleased to submit the proposed budget for the Linn-Benton-Lincoln Education Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2025 and ending June 30th of 2026. It's an honor to serve the districts of Linn, Benton, and Lincoln counties, and I remain deeply committed to supporting our schools, educators, and students through high-quality, cost-effective services. As we look ahead, we continue to navigate a landscape where both the cost and demand for services are increasing at a rate that outpaces funding. While we're seeing moderate increases in revenue, they do not fully match the growing needs of our districts, and this reality has required us to take a hard look at how we operate, not just in terms of managing our organization, but also in how we deliver services in the most effective and sustainable way possible. Our focus remains on innovation, efficiency, and ensuring that we maximize every dollar to the best support the students and educators we serve. Through it all, our staff remains deeply committed to delivering the highest quality care and support to the children, families, and districts we serve. Their dedication is unwavering, and their expertise continues to make a profound impact. However, we must also acknowledge a difficult truth. Funding realities mean we are unable to provide services at a level that fully meets the true and complete needs of our constituents. This challenge is not unique to us, but is one that weighs heavily on our team, as we strive every day to do more with less while keeping student success at the forefront. It's crucial that our communities continue to advocate for the essential work that we do. The services we provide go beyond classroom support. They're vital to the overall success and sustainability of our districts. We serve some of the most vulnerable children in the state, ensuring that they have access to specialized educational resources that might otherwise be out of reach. At the same time, we provide technological infrastructure that individual districts could not afford on their own. An investment that enhances learning, improves operational efficiency, and safeguards our schools against emerging challenges. Despite financial constraints, we've made great strides over the past year, demonstrating our ability to adapt, innovate, and deliver meaningful results for our students. For some of our key accomplishments, we overhauled the local service plan, which I mentioned a little bit ago, unanimously adopted by our districts, ensuring optimal resource alignment to serve schools and students. We've developed the LBL Cultural Compass Framework for fostering an engaging, respectful, and inclusive workspace. And you'll see, for those of you in the room, and I'll make sure this gets sent out to everyone afterwards. But we actually worked through a process to create the cultural compass, and this is a guiding document, and so it's at your places here in the room. And we developed this to foster this engaging workplace for our staff members. We completed an emergency operations plan, enhancing preparedness for potential emergencies. I mentioned already, as I was starting, about the Grow Your Own grant, but we secured a Grow Your Own staffing grant supporting 12 component school districts. It's funded 29 district and ESD staff and college programs, earning 186 credits towards licensure. And actually, this was the first part of the year, so it's actually about double that when we look at the currently. And it's about $300,000 that was allocated in 24-25. We have an extension that's anticipated based on ODE messaging. We launched 3 district-facing portals, a feedback portal for service output and idea submissions, a service status portal for real-time service updates, a district portal for consolidating logins for tech services, which you wouldn't think that you need something like that, but there are oodles of tech logins that happen, and so that's really helpful to our districts. We redesigned external and internal websites to improve usability, accessibility, and content delivery. We've enhanced financial and statistical reporting tools for leadership to enable data-driven decision-making, and that's big kudos to Rocco and the work that he does with our teams. We successfully completed the first year of transitioning districts to the Synergy Student Information System with additional modules in development for 24-25. Tim needed to step out of the room here, but kudos to Tim Jones, our executive IT officer, and his team around this. It is no small task to bring on a new student information system. There's still lots of work to be done, but it works, and we successfully did that transition. And then finally, we initiated a reimagining of the HR program to really improve efficiency and capacity. So this budget you see here tonight, the following budget reflects the year-round efforts of our staff and leadership in responsibly managing our resources. It is prepared in good faith, using the best information available prior to the statutory deadlines required by our public budget process. While adjustments may be necessary as new information emerges, this budget represents our commitment to financial stewardship and service excellence. As we move forward, our commitment to collaboration, equity, and service excellence remains unwavering. By working together and advocating for sustainable funding, we can ensure that every student has access to the education and resources they need to thrive. I appreciate the time and dedication of our budget committee members, and I look forward to our continued partnership in advancing the mission of the ESD. Thank you again for being here. With that, we can advance the slide and get into the nitty-gritty of the budget.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. We're going to walk through a little bit about how the ESD operates so that we have the appropriate level of context. We're going to go through a little bit about sort of the philosophy of how we do the budget and what the numbers mean, and then we'll get into the numbers themselves. And again, feel free to stop and ask questions at any point. So to orient yourself to the ESD, we have 5 major fund groups that we run. The first one's going to be the general fund, so that is basically, the easy way to think about this is that if it doesn't fit into the other funds, it's the general fund. Most of when we'll talk about our resolution revenues, the resolution revenues come into the general fund. That's where we operate out of for Tier 1 and for running the ESD. The special revenue fund is mostly our grants and contracts, so our big grants that we run through, EIECSE, long-term care and treatment, regional inclusive services, and things under the Student Success Act. That all falls under special revenue, along with a handful of other things. We'll go through that as well as we get there. The debt service fund, this is entirely taking care of our full faith and credit obligation fund. That's the only thing that you'll see go through there. Capital Projects Fund is utilized for major capital projects, either to construct or acquire. And then finally, the Internal Service Fund. This is for goods and services that are provided to other districts, other district functions, or other governmental units. So you can sort of think about this as us running small enterprises on the internal service fund and either charging external entities for that or sometimes charging ourselves internally for those services. We'll walk through those in a moment, but it's important to know what is in the budget, how we got there. So looking at our assumptions for resources, we are basing our general fund on the ODE estimates for March 26th, where our portion of the state school fund is projected at $11.5 million. We are projecting local tax revenue just north of $10 million. And we are in the first year of a biennium with grants, which means by the time we develop these things, or at the time we develop them, we know next to nothing about what we are actually going to receive. So our grants are all budgeted for the best information that we had at the time. Mostly that would have been tying back to the governor's budget to try and use that for ratios as to where we might go. Every now and then we get a little bit of ODE guidance on there, and sometimes we just have to look historically and say, what's our best guess moving forward? We have some more intelligence on where those numbers ended up. I'll talk to that a little bit here today. Remember, we start developing this thing in January, February, so the numbers are already stale. An internal service fund is estimated on a per initiative basis, so that means with a program like E-Rate, we will go to the program, we will look at the number of clients we have, say what are we going to charge them next year, and bring an estimate like that in. Next, let's look at assumptions for our expenditures. So first off, we have assumed a 3.5% COLA for all licensed, classified, and administrative staff, plus some specific market adjustments for specific positions. So on average across the budget, this is going to be about 4.25%, but different areas may experience that differently based off of whether they had the people that we thought needed the market adjustments or didn't have the people that had those. So 3.5% to 4.25%. We also bake in a 3.25% step for any staff member that is eligible for a step increase. That's done on a member-by-member basis. PERS rates. We are in, again, the first year of the biennium, so we have PERS rates of 29.7% for Tier 1 and Tier 2. We don't have a whole lot of Tier 1 and Tier 2 people left over. So most people are going to come in at the 26.52 rate for OPSERV plans. Let's take a look at an overview strategic direction of priorities. So how do we think about going through a budget? So our strategic budget priorities. So first off, and this is a really important one, as we go through, we want to balance conservatism and accuracy to ensure appropriate deployment of resources. So what I mean by this is that it's really easy to take an ultra-conservative viewpoint on your budget. And the problem you run into is when you do that, you under-deploy resources. So you certainly don't want to be so aggressive that you get yourself into trouble with the position, but you want to make sure that you're being realistic enough that on day one when you start running your budget on there, you have an appropriate level of services out for what you think you're going to have. We want to maintain flexibility to meet rising operational obligations in a context where funding lags needs. Now I'm going to translate that into budget speak for you on there. It means we hold contingency in some places. Right, so we're going to make sure we're going to budget down to what we think is realistic, but then we strategically are going to say, let's set some funds aside just in case we need them to ensure the sorts of things that need to happen during the year. We are going to ensure alignment of services with organizational goals and the evolving needs of the region. This isn't so much inside the grants because the grants are going to say you got to use our funds for exactly what's intended. But as we look at the things that we have more discretion on, this is us going through and doing a zero-based budget. So we never assume that just because you had $50,000 to spend last year, you have it to spend this year. You have to re-justify that money. Because we may look and say it doesn't really belong there anymore. We have a greater need somewhere else, and we'll move the budget over. It takes longer in the budget process to do it that way, but we really feel it ends up with better results. We want to support sustainable operations while remaining responsive to future challenges and opportunities. So that is being reasonable with the resources that we are deploying. And we want to prioritize clarity and consistency in resource planning to strengthen coordination and trust. That means as we develop the budget on there, we want to make sure that we are being crystal clear with everybody as to what is budgeted where, and that is particularly true with the individuals that direct our programs. We need to make sure they understand what they have available on there and they have buy-in for the program from day one. All right, then let's look at appropriations requests and reserves, since that's kind of what we're doing here today. So as we look at deployment of funds, appropriation authority is requested to ensure flexibility in deploying resources as needs arise. So we're going to budget where we think we need to be, plus we're going to have some funds set aside that are at the discretion of management. There are also funds that are set aside at the discretion of the board. We're going to do full utilization of all budgeted resources, but we don't anticipate spending everything that's in here, and that's pretty common fare for doing public entities. We're going to show use of all funds. We will never anticipate use of funds. The appropriation levels are set to enable timely response to emerging needs and priorities. So again, that's a bit more contingency speak. Appropriating funds at these levels ensures that we are prepared but not overcommitted, and that's what we're really striving for in the budget on there, is to get something that says we're able to do what we need to do without getting too far in front of ourselves and ending up in trouble anywhere. Let's talk a little bit about reserves. So the reserves represent the projected ending fund balance and support the long-term financial stability. So in public budgeting on there, you have to show a balanced budget, which means you must show all funds being utilized. So essentially, when we say funds aren't utilized, we put it in the reserve accounts. All of the reserve levels that we have in here meet or exceed the ESD's policy. So our ESD policy says that we need to maintain 4 to 8 weeks of operating reserves. So as we see reserves on there, or sort of call out the magnitude that they are, so you know that they meet those levels. Adequate reserves ensure continuity of service and resilience in the face of uncertainty. It is absolutely necessary to leave them in there. You will see we have that 4 to 8 weeks as a discretion on there. We prefer 8. There's a lot of stuff that can come up, particularly at the beginning of a biennium, and particularly when you're not quite sure what's happening on the federal level. We think a little bit more reserve on there is a healthy position to be in.
Rocco, can I jump in there?
Absolutely.
As well? Another bit of context with that is it happens that many times we will have grants that the funds will not be dispersed to us well in excess of 8 weeks. And so, a year ago, it took 10 months for us to get many of the grant funds. So we were having to float payroll for a really big chunk of time, which means we need to have the reserves to be able to do that. The reserves that we have on there finally demonstrate our commitment to prudent fiscal financial management. It should represent that to you. It should represent it to the public as they look in on our financials. Significant changes I do just want to call out. You're going to see a very similar budget flowing through year to year, and I'm going to put 2 caveats on there of things that actually material change. So the first one's in the Special Revenue Fund. So Medicaid administrative claims, so that's a program that we run for our districts where they're able to get Medicaid dollars for services that they provide. We are increasing that from what was $6 million in the budget in this current year up to $9 million. For next year. That's based off of recent trending. We have a little laugh about this on here. Unfortunately, we have a super effective director that's really good at getting money for our districts, and we need to give her some more room to put more money through to them. And then this one takes a little bit more time to wrap your brain around, but it's really important. The rest of the special revenue funds, it's important to realize that the ESSER funds expired in the last biennium. Now, to be fair, they expired before the previous budget that you would see in here. However, what happens is in the first year of the biennium, we put all the expenses we could on ESSER. And that let us carry over a bunch of funds into the second year of the
biennium, which is the current year we're operating in. So as we roll from that budget into this one, the loss of the ESSER funds becomes evident in several spaces. That's what I have for significant changes for strategic priorities, reserves, and appropriations. Before I move on, any questions on that? Comments?
I have a question. So help me with, what is the ESSER fund? Would you describe?
Oh, I'm not going to be able to do the acronym on there. Somebody help me out with the acronym. Anybody remember it? There were funds that were appropriated at the federal level on their response to COVID crisis, and they were pretty substantial. So millions of dollars that were appropriated. We received some of them centrally as an agency, but most of them were appropriated to the grants that we have themselves. So we have things like EIECSC in ESSER 2 and 3 had $1.1 million of ESSER funds available to be spent. Substantial. You're catching me on the acronym.
Yeah.
I promise you, it's in the back in the.
Elementary and secondary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions, thoughts, or
Acronym
comments?
test comes later.
No, I think that explains some of what I was looking at, had questions on, so.
We'll go through as we get there as well.
Actually, I do have a question.
Yep.
It says MAC, but is that all Medicaid or just the,
That's just math.
So it's not fee-for-service Medicaid?
No.
That's a lot, 9? That's,
It's a lot.
I mean, when I was in Albany, we were billing, maybe $300K a year.
Yep.
Big districts, that's way up.
Yep.
Huh.
It's very well managed.
It's really up a lot, and we're actually looking at getting into the fee-for-service part of it. And so what helped us a lot, and you know, it was both strategic and just lucky that we were able to hire the right person, but we hired someone from the healthcare sector that knows, that's been working in Medicaid inside and out for the last decade plus. And so she knows so much and is working with colleagues and other ESDs across the state, and it's a game changer for us in our district.
And you will keep a percentage and the rest goes right back to the districts.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Let's move along. We'll stop with the hot air portion and we'll get into the numbers. All right, so this is the overview of the total budget that we're looking at this year. The full budget is $85.2 million. It lays out over those 5 funds that we spoke about before. We'll go through each one of those funds in detail. But I think context here as you're looking at it, one of the things people don't realize is that we do as much service inside of our grants and contract as we do with our resolution revenues. It is a really big piece of what we do is servicing those grants.
And resolution revenues are the general fund. Yeah, keep y'all on track with that.
All right, let's dig into these a little bit deeper. Let's go to full-time staff, important. Our biggest expense is staff. We are budgeted for 243.8 FTE. And you'll see it's roughly equivalent FTE in the general fund and special revenue, about half as much in the internal service fund. There is a little bit of an asterisk on here that this is FTE we can count from normal types of contracts. We still employ other kind of labor that doesn't have FTE associated with it. So it would be things like extended contracts where we don't pick up FTE from there. There are certain temporary contracts that we don't. And you will hear things about our contract labor. They are people that we have working for us doing service, but they don't actually show up as payroll. It's us paying contracts out to contract houses. So we have a little bit more labor embedded in the system than what you see on here.
And just further context on that, we will go out to contract houses to seek labor when we cannot get that labor on our own payroll. And so one of the most common contract house jobs that we've been utilizing for the past few years have been speech language pathologists. They're very difficult to find, and so many of the speech language pathologists that serve our districts, that our districts purchase from us, are actually not technically our employees. They're actually contract house employees.
final overview. So this is looking at trending over the course of the years. And I think it's helpful to look at the resources in terms of the funds themselves rather than the source of being federal or state. So you can see the sort of trending that's happened with the general fund. It kind of bobbles up and down. We're looking at about $33 million next year. The special revenue fund, and we'll go through it, that increase from $32 to $34 million looks terrific, but keep in mind that monster increase that we're doing for Medicaid administrative claims is in there. So very much so it's going to feel like many of the other funding that is in there is flat. Debt services, you're not going to see much in there. You won't see much in the capital projects. And then you'll see a little bit of movement in internal service fund. That $15.2 million of resources that you're seeing in there is very similar to what we have for the current year. We did have some changes in the program, so we'll talk about that as we get to the internal service. And then looking at the expenditures themselves on the requirements, you're going to see a steady increase in salaries. FTE has remained relatively constant across the agency, if not quite within the individual fund groups on there, but of course, expenses do rise. You'll also see that increase on the associated payroll costs. And then as we flow down on here, the purchase services are a large number, and the last number I'll call out is that big old transfer number, and we'll put some of those in context as we go through the individual funds. Other use of funds, that $8.4 and $7.6 million, most of that is the reserves that are sitting out there. And looking at that budget FTE in a little bit more detail over time. So you see the general fund is staying relatively steady. Please don't think of that as like, oh, you picked up one additional person. Nope. We had a whole bunch of stuff change over here, a whole bunch of stuff change over there that netted out to an increase of just over a position. The internal service fund, we actually are moving down a couple of positions. We did shut down a couple of programs this year, so you'll see the decline that happens as a result of it. And then as you go through the grants, so you'll see that regional inclusive services, that's a fairly substantial drop in FTE that's on the grant, and that is the ESSER effect that you're seeing. We just don't have the capacity to do that anymore. SSA grant is a similar kind of decrease, a smaller decrease on EIECSE, and you'll see the Region 16 grant went away, so we don't have that anymore either. But that's how we get from that 257 down to the 243. Thoughts or question on staffing? Let's talk about the general fund. So I like this view. I'll be very open. I'm not in love with government formats of financials on there. They are not terribly intuitive when you talk about operating an entity. So I will show you sort of the mandatory formats that the state wants to put on there, but I'm also going to put a couple views like this in because I think it's a little bit easier to follow along with. So you generally see what's happening. That's going to be our beginning fund balance that we're looking at in the general fund. So that's what's sitting in our savings account. The other resources, that's going to be monies that are coming in the current year. So people should be cutting us checks for that amount. So you see that sort of $25 million coming in. The operational expenses are the normal things we do to run the ESD. So that's going to be all of our payroll. It's going to be all of our associated payroll costs. It's going to be things like us paying for software. And importantly, to keep in mind, it's going to be reserves we put out there to spend that we don't actually intend on spending, right? But we want to make sure that we have them available in case we get in a situation. Transfers and transits on the general fund, mostly what you're seeing on here, there's about a $500,000 transfer that goes to pay for our debt service. $5.25 million of these transfers are the method that you take care of your Tier 2 services. So we bring revenue into the general fund and then we transfer it over to the internal service fund where we pay for Tier 2 services for our districts. The convention publicly on there is to report it as a transfer and report it as a revenue on the other fund. And then finally, you'll see the reserves on there. So the contingency reserve is going to be $5.3 million. To give you context of, is that enough? Well, if we were trying to do an 8-week reserve, that would be reserving for north of $35 million of expenditures of which we just flat out do not run. So we are very well reserved on that 5.3 million. General fund resources, so there's that required view that I'm going to show you because the state really likes the required view. We budget to higher levels than we actually are going to bring in. So you see we don't bother budgeting the things like, are we going to get $5,000 in rental expense? If it comes in, terrific. But those are the major line items that we're going to take in on the general fund, including that beginning fund balance that you'll see on the bottom, getting us to the total of $33 million available. As we look at the requirements, so in the general fund, we're looking at about $9.3 million of salaries and payroll coming off of that. Associated payroll costs going up, both because payroll itself goes up and it follows, but also because the PERS rates went up for the next biennium. Then you'll see some adds and moves, some differences in purchase services staying roughly where they are. You can see, I'll call to your attention as you look to 23-24 actual, that purchase services running around $1 million, and then our budget's running at 2.8. That's where our reserves are. We hold them in that purchase services line. So no, we don't actually intend on spending 2.8. There will be quite disappointing. All right. This is the view that I would actually like to show you because this really explains, as an ESD, how do things operate, where's the money coming in from. So the first thing we're going to look at are the resolution revenues. So this is 3 sources of revenues, mostly taxes that we receive, state school fund, and miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is state forest fees. They don't amount to very much, but they are included in the resolution revenues. What's important about the resolution revenues is that the ORS demands that we spend 90% of that directly supporting our districts. And that 90% has to be governed by our local service plan. So I think it's important to illustrate to you here, how do we actually parse that out budgetarily? So you'll see that total of $21.9 million of resolution revenues, and you'll see that 105 ESD, that's a sub-fund that we use to run our centralized expenses. And you'll see that's us taking 10% of that $21.9 million and saying, run that. All of the rest of it goes into either Tier 1 or Tier 2 services. Tier 1 services, the budget is set by the regional superintendents. It was approved this year at $15.5 million. So in that Tier 1 column, we're going to put $15.5 million of the revenue. And then everything else that's left over is available to be distributed out in Tier 2 funds. That's distributed to our districts based off of their proportion of ADMW in the region. And down below that, we have some more revenues that come in that only come into the central ESD pot. So the big one is fees charged to grant. So that's us charging indirect rates on a grant. So if we spend $100 on the EIECSE grant, the grant says go ahead and take $9 to help pay for centralized costs. That $2.8 million is us doing that, of course, across our various sources. We also have interest income. We run a healthy balance, fortunately, on there. We conservatively are estimating $400,000 of interest income for next year. And then you'll see some beginning fund balances out there. So $5.5 million of the beginning fund balance of 7.8 goes in that 105 fund. So that is where we hold our reserves. The $548,000 you see in Tier 1, that is contingency that the superintendents say just in case you run over. And they also have a $200,000 strategic reserve fund that the superintendents can say, we want to do something new and here's our $200,000 we can use. So we reserve that $550,000 for them. And then the $1.8 million you see on Tier 2, we are a bank for our districts. If they don't want to spend all their Tier 2 dollars, we hold onto it for them until they're ready to spend it. So we're anticipating holding about $1.8 million at the beginning of the year. So that is a much more descriptive layout of the source of $33 million for general fund. And if we're gonna show you the revenues that way, we might as well show you the expenses that way as well. So behind the screen, the 105 ESD, that is essentially where we manage the superintendent office. It's the business office, HR, facilities, and a very small piece of IT. We hold things there like our debt service, we hold things there like our insurance, and we hold a lot of centralized software costs that rather than charging each individual place some portion of our ERP license on there, we just record the entire expense sitting in there and pay for it through the fees that we receive on the grants and as our 10% of the resolution revenues. So we have about 18 FTE that's back there. You'll see that other use of funds, that's our reserve. In Tier 1, those are the services that we are providing to our districts. That's 77, about 78 FTE. That splits out, it's about 60 to 65% is educationally oriented as opposed to technologically oriented. And then Tier 2, you'll see that $5.2 million. That says we're anticipating that our districts are going to say we want to spend $5.2 million of our available Tier 2 funds. You'll see that $5.2 million as a revenue occurring on the internal service fund later. So far, deep breath, water, more cookies out there. Let's move on to the special revenue fund. So again, let's take a look at that view where we look at our beginning fund balances down to our ending fund balance. This begs the question, how do grants have beginning fund balances? And the answer is they really don't. Most of what we do inside of the special revenue fund is grant related. There are some funds we put in there that are non-grant related. And very specifically, we have a technology fund out there that we've accumulated through the years that says just in case we have something that needs to go like the server room, we have money to pay for that. We have money reserved for having to do a replacement of our vehicles. We have a grant stabilization fund, and that's essentially just in case a grant runs over or something goes south on a grant on there, that we have some money set aside to be able to take care of it without dipping into other sources. So we do run some fund balance sitting on there, and yes, there's also some accounting nuance in the way that you might account for the grant that will leave a teeny balance there one way or another. But the overwhelming majority of that $3 million that's sitting out there are those ones that I just called out. Resources coming in, so we're looking at about $32 million coming in, operational expenses of 25.5, and then transfers and transits. We have sub-grantors on some of our grants, so South Coast ESD is a sub-grantor on the EIECSE grant and the Cascade Regional grant, so we just basically forward cash on through to them. You'll also see part of that transfer and transit, that's our Medicaid administrative claims, so when we get money back in from the claim and we push it back out to the districts, that's transit going out to them. Here's your not helpful view looking at $34 million and it comes in through other. Here's a helpful view in looking at where it comes from. So you can see the actual size of the programs that we're running. EIECSE obviously being the largest of them all, and it's good context to understand how much larger that is than everything else. 13.15 is what was budgeted. Regional inclusive, 3.6 was what was budgeted. We're very happy to say that we're super close on those numbers based off of subsequent information that we got from the state. So we think the EIECSE grant is going to come in now at about 12.975, which was a really close to the bullseye. We think the regional inclusive grant is probably going to come in at about 3.65. We'll get a little bit more off of it. Those numbers aren't final. They're just the new updated intelligence of what's out there. Long-term care and treatment, 2.7 might be a stretch. And the grant information comes in late on there, and they do tend to layer it up where they say, you're gonna get this much, we found some more, we found some more. But right now, their number is kind of significantly south of that $2.8 million to the extent where we would not fully deploy what we have budgeted based on what we currently know. Student success, that $2 million is essentially flat to the current year, and flat is a really big hope. In a lot of those cases on there, there's been a really strong signal that they're pulling back on those student success funds. TNF, that's a single person that we run off of the TNF grant. We did get updated information off of it that grant is probably going to be cut in half. That may shut the grant down. And then the de minimis special revenue, we have about $100,000 of a smattering of this, that, and the other, where we're able to do some small things with it, but they're not terribly descriptive as to how we're spending $34 million. Medicaid administrative claims, like I said, we're going to go up to a $9 million volume is what we're going to go for. And then that other ESD restricted, that's that $3.3 million. That's to make sure that we have the reserves out there, that if we want to deploy the $1.8 million that's sitting in the tech fund, the $400,000 that's sitting in the vehicle fund, or access the $300,000 that is sitting for our grant stabilization funds on there, that is available. There also is a reserve sitting out there for just in case we get some more grants or we get an expansion on a grant so that we don't have to come back for more appropriations. So it's sitting somewhere around $1 million, might be a little bit south of that, I'll look it up. But extra funds on there to make sure that if EIECSE gets we found an extra $500,000, we have space for it somewhere. We don't like to put those sorts of things budgeted in the grants themselves because when we're managing those grants, we want the budgeted numbers to really represent how we think operations should come in. So if we have extra, we want to keep it on the side. Questions on those because there's a lot of information out there. All right, let's see how that's spent on the grants. So no surprises again. Biggest expenses on there are salaries and associated payroll costs. As I showed you before, that FTE moving down on the grants, that's the ESSER effect that's moving the FTE down on the grants. We have a bit more in the purchase services, and most other things are staying right in line with where we would have them in the prior years. The increase in transfers on there has more to do with the Medicaid administrative claims than anything else. Let's move on to debt service. This is a really easy one. We don't hold a balance on there at the end of the year. We pay $475,000 of stuff, so we transfer $475 in, and then we pay off our debt. Just in case you're curious, we're going to pay off $320,000 of principal and pay about $155,000 in interest. About $5.1 million remaining on that bond, 5.1 or 5.6, because the budget document on there. Capital Projects Fund, again, this is a really easy fund. So we have somewhere in the $2.25 million sitting in there for a beginning balance. You'll see that other resources coming in, that $45,000, that is rent. So we do capital improvements for some of the buildings that EIECSE runs in. We front it as the agency, and then they pay it back to us as rent over time. Because the grant couldn't just say, we need a new roof and it's going to be $400,000. We pay it, they pay us back over time. Other than that, we're going to leave $1.5 million available for capital projects on there. We are not going to spend $1.5 million on capital projects next year. I'm going to put the big note here for everybody, like, my goodness, you know, could you guys just go hog wild? And the answer is no, because any major expenditure that we would do on here would have to go through the board anyway. That just gives the board the ability to access it. And then we'll say, without question, we'll reserve $750 for future years. We know we won't have to access that. You know. Okay. state.
How many buildings do you own that you're?
This is our major spot, and, yeah, and then we do lease out and do capital improvements on a couple more. We have, what, 2 warehouses?
Yeah, so we have, we've got 2 other spots where, yeah, ECSD programs are, and we have long-term leases. I guess the one out at the coast, I think we're in year 3 of a 18-year-long lease, something like that. With Dixie School, which is owned by Corvallis School District, we're in year 2 of a 20-year lease. And with those, we created an agreement that we would do upkeep on the buildings. And in turn, they would let us keep those buildings for a big chunk of time, and we wouldn't have to chase around classroom spaces in school districts like what has happened in the past.
Are you doing something similar with Virgo or Clover Ridge?
No, the Clover Ridge one is actually a much shorter one, and in talking with Greater Albany's leadership, it's possible that Clover Ridge might be pulled from us in the near future, and then we're actually looking at utilizing the Fir Grove building, which is in North Albany, so it might be a swap seats thing.
Internal service fund, so once again, we're going to start off with a view, making sure that we're looking at our balances. So we're anticipating a beginning fund balance of about $4.25 million. Anticipating $11 million of other resources coming in. Keep in mind, $5 million of that is those transfers coming off of the general fund, paying the internal service fund. Operational expenses, $13.6 million. There are 2 key things to understand in the operational expenses. One way that districts are allowed to use their Tier 2 dollars is to transit money. So they can say they can take up to 50% of their allocation for services that the ESD doesn't provide. So we do put a big lump of like $1.8 million out there that says, well, they might just take their money and push that out there. Also, operational expenses, we have a certain amount of strategic reserve built into that one as well. And then we would say, reserve-wise on there, there will be no need to access that $1.6 million. These are the various funding sources that you'll see coming in. I'm going to give you a better view of that. So here's how we actually think about the internal service fund, and it's a little bit easier to follow how the money comes in. So first, let's think in terms of inter-fund transfers. So there's that $5.23 million I keep calling out for you on there. That's money coming off the general fund that's going over to the internal service fund. And you'll see we're anticipating that districts are going to purchase $2.9 million of educational services. So that's things like paying for speech-language pathologists or school psychs or behavior consultants. We're anticipating they're going to purchase $1.8 million of, that they will do $1.8 million of transits. So we'll just say, can you give me $1.8 million? And then they're going to purchase another $400,000 of IT, and then about $100,000 of other stuff, which would be business services or some administrative services or whatnot. So that $5.25 million comes in through transfers. Then we have local revenues. So this is $5.7 million, and the way to think about this is people cutting us checks for $5.7 million. So again, a lot of this is going to be our component districts, but a good portion is going to be non-component districts as well. So we do provide things like Infinite Visions and Synergy for non-component districts, and when they do, they pay into this fund, and we pay their expenditures out of here as well. So you'll see IT services is going to be a mix of that. Education services, that $2 million that you're seeing, is districts saying, hey, in addition to the dollars that I have available on my Tier 2, I'm going to reach into my pocket and I'm going to pay you for some behavior consultant time or whatnot. And so they do actually utilize more than their Tier 2 services with ESD.
Yeah, and I'm going to pause for a second. For context, Rocco mentioned 2 programs. Infinite Visions is a business software program, and Synergy is the student information system, and we actually provide that to many other, more districts actually that are not our components. Our component districts are our 12 in our 3-county region, but we provide those services for certain, that they pay us to other districts outside of our region.
OAESD, as we mentioned before, we are the fiscal agent for OAESD. We have to record the revenues on our books. They'll have about $700,000 of revenue, so we'll pop that there. And then again, there's like $116,000 of other things that we would aggregate in there, people would be cutting us checks for. So that is $5.7 million coming in that way. And then the final portion on there is that $4.25 million balance. Again, I think it's really important to understand where that balance sits. So 2.9 is ESD operations. That would be money that is available. Part of the reserve, that 1.5 we're leaving out there, is us not utilizing all of that 2.9. The unemployment fund, so we hold the way that unemployment is paid here. Grants and funds are charged a fee for unemployment. We collect it and put it in the internal service fund, and when somebody makes an unemployment claim, we pay it out of this fund. We currently are not collecting anything for unemployment because we have more than adequate funds sitting in here to cover expenses.
Is that the fund that Roger and Jim and I will get?
If that's all you want, I was gonna use the ESD operations fund for you guys.
Yeah.
If that's all you want, Gina.
It is important when we think about unemployment. You know, I'm sure heard this many times already, but once staff members that don't work year-round can be able to claim unemployment in the summertime, it has really started to hit districts, education entities for unemployment. So it's primarily those education providers that are hourly, like instructional assistants that can, you know, that can claim unemployment during the summertime.
Okay, $275,000 of the money sitting on our books isn't ours, it belongs to OAESD. And then $250,000 is out there, that is the actual Medicaid funds that we would claim, and these are related to stuff that has been done for EIECSE over time. So we have about $250 sitting on there. So that is how the internal service fund is constructed, should give you a better feel as to where the funding is coming from. As we look at the expenditures for the internal service fund, again, you're going to see about 40 FTE coming off salary-wise on there for that $3.8 million. There is a reduction year over year because we did close down both Oregon routes and low voltage services. We made some other changes in there as well where there are some net pluses and minuses, so it's not all that, but those are two of the big factors in the decrease in FTE. And that should bring us to the end of the numbers. So that's a pretty good high-level view of what's going on at the ESD, which actually runs at a much greater degree of complexity than you see up on the slides here, as is evidenced by the 120 pages that is in the budget in front of you. So hopefully that gives you the context you need for an overall view. At this time, is there any detail you'd like to delve into, whether it's something specifically in the budget or outstanding questions that are in your head in terms of what we're looking at deploying, what we have going on?
You hold 25% of your general fund reserve, so I get that right on it. Almost 25, about 22 and a half.
Yeah, it's difficult to put that in context on there because remember, portions of that aren't ours. Right, $1.8 million of that belongs to our districts. It's not really us holding it in reserve, it's them not utilizing it and leaving it there.
Well, I understand, like we talk about grants and things, but is that typical for ESD around?
It is pretty
That'd be
typical.
way out for a district.
Yeah, it is really typical, and a lot of it is because a large percentage of our revenue comes in the form of grants, and honestly, the payments on those are very, very slow. And so then we have to sit on enough dollars to be able to cover payroll expenses for sometimes many, many months.
Yeah, if you're writing $20 million of grants, it's not to be $4 or $5 million out of pocket on them before you're paid back.
Can you, share, Rocco, so we can see the people up on the screen too? That'd be great. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
How are the districts being attended, especially this being a new biennium, as far as how many kids are in the classroom? Is that going to affect?
So we get double hit on this one. So we have seen enrollment in our region has decreased, and it's one of the sharpest decreases in the state over time, which is particularly difficult for the ESD because although enrollment has gone down, special ed services is going up.
And we're down about 3,000 students in the last five years. So if we go 2020 to currently, we're a little more than 3,000 students
But I'm
less.
sure, like,
regionally.
special education is double.
Yeah, all of the other things
Special
have
ed,
gone up.
particularly since COVID on there, has just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
We've also seen an increase in demand for tech services on there. We added the synergy on in the last couple of years. Cybersecurity is another big one that, everybody, we had to respond, we responded as an ESD. So we have more demand on our services, but the overall funding in the region in order to pay us directly is dwindling. So it really, we have made some pretty substantial changes in how we're operating to see if we can accommodate that.
Just to give you a number, and this would be out of a different slide deck, but as we spoke with our superintendent during the budget, tier 1 budget, $15.5 million that Rocco called out at one point is that because of the enrollment and those resolution dollars going down, we actually have seen an increase. I want to say it was just shy of a 40% increase in special education evaluation that we have to provide, but only a 5% increase over the last 5 years in actual revenue. Even though if you looked at, there's a far greater increase than it was 5.2%, I think. Yep. There's more increase if you look at the general fund statewide, more than 5.2%. But that's the net of us losing all of those students. So it is a really challenging spot for us to be in.
Does your basic weight the same way as districts? Do you get double weight for special ed?
No.
The
ESD budget, essentially, you take the availability of the state school fund, 4.5% of that is carved off for the ESDs, and you essentially get the proportion that your component district's budget total up to the total state school fund. So in some manner, when their weightings run high, it helps the ESD, but we don't get a direct impact for it.
All right, so increasing the cap to 15%.
No, because it's going to increase it for everybody on there, and we'll get the same proportion.
Yeah, so some of the special ed increases that have been discussed in the legislature recent really are not something that would terribly positive for the ESD, like the special ed cap. Now, it could impact it in an indirect way. If districts have less costs, or they receive more money, then they likely are going to purchase more services, or it will free up money for them to do other things with us. But it's not a direct impact for us. Really the only two that have been discussed recently are the early intervention, early childhood special education, EIECSE, and the regional inclusive services grant. So RIS. Those are the two. Yes, sir.
Are the grants you receive mostly state grants, or are you in the position of wondering what's happening?
We do have some wondering about what might the federal impact be. Federal dollars are commingled with state dollars, and then they're executed by Oregon Department of Education. So definitely, we'll use our biggest one, our EIECSE grant, has a portion of it that's federal funding. They mix it together and then they send it out to us in one lump sum. And so at this point, in the state level superintendent meetings that I've been participating in the last couple of months, this next year is a little bit more positive, even in spite of the economic forecast that really dampened things an awful lot, this last week, but, it's certainly more positive than the following year. What we're seeing, from our federal, lobbyists with the Superintendent Association, the National Superintendent Association, is that things like Title I funding for school districts, Title II funding for school districts are probably going to take a very big hit in the second year of the biennium. So we're feeling okay right now. We're certainly on shaky ground, but this next year is looking like it could be a lot better than the following year, which will have a bit of an impact in terms of how we deploy the dollars. We're going to be a bit conservative with our expenditures in the first year of the biennium to see if that needs to sort of level out in the second year of the biennium. Paco, anything
Yeah,
else?
that essentially covers it. I mean, most people at this point are hoping for flat federal funding from year to year on the grant. It is a little opaque with the state. So when we look at, if I go back and I pull the EICAC grant payments for the last several years, and I say, how much is the federal? It really varies from year to year. So it's kind of opaque as to how the state decides how much federal flows through to the grant, or even if they're choosing different amounts of federal flowing through to different agencies. So it's really hard to get a solid figure on what might happen year to year.
Other questions, detailed questions? It certainly is challenging. It is a complicated budget, and on the years, I'm in year 27 of my career in education at this point, and 22 of those years were in school district, and the ESD budget is certainly more complex than a school district budget, with all the different pots for revenue and everything. However, this is probably the most easily understood, distilled down. Big kudos to Rocco and the work that he does. I just have such thanks for him and his ability to take something complex and distill it into something that is really manageable for us to be able to look at and be able to make decisions. So we truly have a gift in his service.
I do appreciate the views that you gave us. I mean, yeah, we can see the detailed history, but it's nice to see that short version to go with. Great, so thank you for
I appreciate that. I think a lot of times people mistake detail for transparency, and it's really easy to obfuscate things in detail. There's a
very people in detail.
Yeah, there's a certain level that you have to pull it back to get it to be contextual and operational. We strive to hit the balance.
His last 4 years, Rocky was 15.
You're great at contextualizing and explaining what the numbers mean. And sometimes it's a little, especially when you're looking at a whole bunch of them, it's a little opaque just looking at the numbers, but hearing the context, it makes it a lot more understandable and digestible. So thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments?
So I'm going to reshare my screen here.
Yeah, so in your agenda, on the second page of your agenda, and Rocco, we can put it up on the screen, if it is the will of the budget committee to move forward and pass this budget, there are two action items.
You don't want to check,
in here.
no public comment.
But, oh yes, sorry, yeah, we want to see if there's public comment.
Yeah,
Thank you, I jumped ahead.
It looks like your process means people would have to come ahead of time, so did anybody sign up ahead of time for public comment?
We did.
Okay, so we have no public comment, and so then we would talk about subsequent meetings, but nobody's asked for more information, so I don't think there's any reason to consider it. Okay, go ahead, Jason, now you're gonna.
Yeah, so now, sorry, this is where, inside my own head, I knew there wasn't any public comment. Thank you for pointing me out. there's all kinds of things that are inside my head, you know, we were joking about it, I know, earlier about the conversations we have with ourselves, and I'm like, those ones when I disagree with myself are really entertaining. So you'll see in your agenda that, we need two motions here, this evening. We need a motion to approve the budget, as recommended. And you can see the aggregate amount of $85,209,700. And then we also need a motion to levy the tax rate. So I'll pause there.
Could you skip that?
Two separate, right?
There's two separate motions. Yeah, please skip that one. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I entertain a motion.
I will motion to approve the Lynn Benton Lincoln Education Services for budget for the 2025-2026, the aggregate amount of $85,209,700 to be approved as recommended.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Unanimous. I'd entertain a second motion for the budget.
I move that the permanent tax rate of .3049 per $1,000 value be levied in support of the general fund. This tax rate is expected to generate $10,050,000 in taxes.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Take a motion to adjourn.
I think you can just adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
online.
Have a good
Have a
night.
great